Welcome to another in the series of DTUC Visits the Artist. I'm your host, Ernie Underhill, and the artist we're visiting today is Phyllis Margolin. Phyllis has a studio in Argenta, but currently she's exhibiting both at the Langham Art Center in Caslow and that famous Baker Street Gallery in Nelson, where we're going to interview her today and look at some of her current works. Phyllis, you're pretty well known in this area, both as a watercolorist and a teacher. I wonder if we could go back, take a look at your roots. Where do you come from, and where have you studied?
A long way back, I think. I was born in Medicine Hat, Alberta, but I grew up in Stouffville, Ontario, a small town outside of Toronto, and was always interested in drawing. And as a 10-year-old, I was able to get scholarships to study with Arthur Lismer. He was doing the well-known children's classes at that time at the Ontario College of Art. And I was fortunate in continuing to get scholarships right through high school and into art school.
So you started pretty early in your life?
Yes, I did.
Back in school,
yeah,
and
way
you should have been doing other things.
I should have, but I used to, in the small town I lived in, I used to wander around out in the woods and gather wildflowers and so on. And when I was really small, I was painting those and sketching and doing little botanical studies and so on. And I was encouraged by my father and my uncle, who sent me my first art book. He was president of University of British Columbia. And I think that's one reason I ended up out here. I remember him talking so much about
Are there
BC.
others in your family history who were involved with the arts, like you mentioned?
My mother was a singer and a violinist. And my father sang and was interested. He used to go sketching with me.
That might account for some of the rhythms we're going to see in your work.
Maybe. I also like gardening, and I spend a lot of time gardening now, and I used to with him. We had a place that actually was my great-grandfather's, and they had been farmers, and they had retired and come into town and had this big garden, perennial beds and so on, and I always worked in those with my dad and liked gardening. So I'm getting more and more into doing some flower studies too.
You spoke of your early subject matter in school. It really hasn't changed a great deal, has it?
Well, it's come and gone. It's varied because I've lived in a lot of different places.
What other kinds of things have interested you in as subject?
Well, a few years ago, I was invited to Micronesia, South Pacific, and I did a few classes with the first graduating native teachers. And then I painted jungle and forest and ocean and so on, and was
You would have
working there
loved
for a while.
the flamboyant kind of color that I think you brought into here.
Yes,
in
yes,
that
it
area.
was. It was very colorful. And I had then the first show that they'd ever had in the South Pacific, which was interesting. And there were no buildings with walls, so we had to find an old post office building that they had put some walls into and have the show there. And the governor of the islands came. It was quite exciting.
Right.
Yeah.
You also spoke about some of your teachers who I know are now in the annals of Canadian art history. I wonder if you could mention those again.
Yes, well, I worked with, I graduated from Central Tech in Toronto, which had a big art and still has a big art program. And I worked with Charles Goldhammer, well-known war artist, and who later became a relative of mine.
Oh.
And Carl Schaefer, a well-known Canadian watercolorist, Doris McCarthy, Peter Haworth and his wife, and I worked in sculpture with Emmanuel Hahn and Elizabeth Hahn, who've designed.
There's a strong group came out of Eastern Canada
Very
during that
strong.
time.
Yes, yes.
Most of them are mentioned in Canadian art history
Yes,
today.
all of those people are quite well known.
I don't know how close we can get on this, but there's some other interesting things occurring there. You're really very involved with nature and organic growth.
Yes, and this, to me, has a feeling of life that I enjoy in flowers. I don't do, as you can see, a real botanical study, but this bouquet was from my own garden, and And I enjoy growing the things, and I enjoy seeing the life in flowers and the vitality, especially in close-ups. There's really a lot that goes on. And
Who of those, that group that you've mentioned, do you feel were probably most sympathetic to what you were doing, that you felt you got the most of?
well, at that time it was a commercial course. I ended up doing fashion illustration and window dressing for Eaton's and that sort of thing, you know. Just about anything.
Most of those artists also worked in that field. I
Well,
understand.
yes. They were all teaching,
In their
of course,
early
at the
years.
school, but they did. Yes, a lot of those worked with Toronto agents, you know, commercial efforts. But this, I feel, has a lot of vitality, and I
Yeah,
rather
there's
like
a lot
that
of
when I got
interesting
it done.
things occurring that you've explored. You know, that brings me to the question of technique. How has your technique evolved through the years? It's pretty free, isn't it?
Yes. I work very wet. You know, I give workshops, and people are always a little bit alarmed when they first see me soaking the paper and just letting the paint flow. And then as it dries, I bring in detail and tighten it up a little bit.
Well, what is your concern with reality then? Realism,
I'm not,
if at all?
well, to about this extent. I'm more interested in a feeling of excitement in a painting, or a mood. Not necessarily. Sometimes they're calm. But I'm not interested in total realism. I think it can be very static. And I like to have some other feeling happening. When I paint on the prairies, the work is more simplified, because the prairies are simplified. Here you're looking for things to eliminate. There's so much here. You have to eliminate. And on the prairies, you're looking for details. So a little
Right.
tuft of grass and a shadow and a fence post become a painting.
Yeah, there's so much here that less becomes more.
That's right. And I don't think I'd ever be an abstractionist, but I would pare it down, and I do when I work on the prairies. They're big sky and simplified.
Do you see yourself as an interpreter?
Yes, I think more of that. Yes. People look at things and say, oh, I know where that is, but they're not exact.
Yeah, it's interesting that this is your own personal observation and feeling, and yet people looking at it can become in tune with what you see and feel, I'm sure.
And people do, as I said, they do recognize a place usually, but they also recognize the fact that I have interpreted it in my own way.
Speaking of place, let's just look at this next one.
Oh yes, this one. I was doing a workshop near Grand Forks, and this was out near Rock Creek, and the willow caught my eye. It was golden willow, and it was back off the main road, and so I went back and just did this on the spot with the bare hills of the area, grassy hills in the background.
Yeah, you seem to deal with two aspects. One in which we get a view much like this. It shows a relatively small environment that's touched by man. I know that you have figures in it. And then from there you begin to go into little areas that you blow up and you become very introvert about.
That's interesting, because there is detail in some places, and then the rest is simplified out. This has been purchased, and the person who bought it realized it, or felt that he could see a figure here. This is the shoulder and the back of a woman, and this is her hair, as if she was shampooing her hair.
Washing her hair.
So, you know, I hadn't seen it. Usually
Subliminal.
Yes, yeah. Usually I'll put a painting aside and look at it a long time later and maybe do something else to it. But I hadn't noticed that figure effect in this, but he was intrigued by that.
Once you mention it, it's hard to see the painting without seeing the figure.
Yes,
more.
once you see it.
While you're dealing with an area like this, what is your mode of work? Do you work out there in nature, or do you take back notes and
I do
use your
both.
studio?
I do both. This was worked on the spot, and then some more details and so on worked over it later when I got in. This was a studio work. partly because it was so huge, but it was from flowers from my own garden.
It's interesting that your studio works are pretty fresh and vibrant. Often, going back to the studio, the artist tends to impose more intellectual concerns on the work, and it becomes less spontaneous.
Yes, I have felt that, and for a long time I almost resisted working in a studio. But one winter I got pneumonia 3 times, and I was working outside and freezing.
A forced situation, right?
A forced situation. I did one painting that went to the National Gallery in Ottawa with the BC Women's Artists show. And I had been working outside and actually freezing. The one painting froze as I was working on it. And I decided after that it was rather much.
Let's go over to another landscape that covers a little more. This seems to be involved very much with atmospheric conditions, and certainly anyone having gone up through that valley will recognize that kind of atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. This was early morning, again around Rock Creek, Grand Forks area, and there were mists and fogs, and it was fall, it was autumn. If you could see it in color, you'd recognize the gray blues and the orange golds of the area.
Yeah, you certainly deal with the characteristics of watercolor. You let it have its own way a lot, it looks.
That frightens some people when they're in my workshops.
I think it's beautiful that you can incorporate that and make it make these accidents fit your situation.
Yeah, I have one story I've told some of my people in workshops about a friend who got something, a large painting, into American Watercolor Society show. And I saw the painting later and I said, "Oh, I really like this part." And he said, "Yes, that's where I spilled my coffee." And I think that is really making use of accidents. And these bleeds, these are really bleeds back, some of these. That could be considered accidents, but it almost gives the effect of a willow tree. It happened, or fog. I let things run and
I would think that would be quite encouraging to your students, the fact that they too can have these experiences, these accidents, and make them work without getting involved in a lot of study where they feel they're insignificant in trying to emulate things.
That's right.
You've incorporated so many chance things.
I try to get people to really loosen up and stand up and use a big brush and work the paper wet and let their arms swing and get into it, get involved. It has a freshness that way.
Right, yeah, it is. It keeps it quite crisp. And certainly there's no argument as to what medium it is. Speaking of medium, what other mediums do you work in, or do you?
I used to work a lot in oils and caustic. Are you familiar with the beeswax and oil? I used to do a lot of that, hot wax. And I love it. It's very exciting. I might start again. But it doesn't lend itself, it's such a strong color. Comes out almost like rich copper enameling, that it doesn't show well with watercolor. And also it's a very different media.
Different. It'd be interesting to see how you deal with that quality of it.
Yeah.
When your watercolors are so well established as to what you're going to incorporate. We recognize one from another, that very personal watercolor approach you have. Another one, a landscape also. Same area?
This is up, let me see, Dead Man's Creek, out toward Ashcroft, and this side of Ashcroft. And it was a late fall day. The evening shadows were falling across. You can see them falling across the hills. And brilliant, brilliant color in this brilliant green field that caught my eye, and the old farm buildings.
This would have been done out there?
Yes, this was done on the spot. Actually, let me think. No, I did a sketch on the spot, and I worked this in the studio later.
You make color notes out there?
I make color notes. That's one thing I stress, is doing a lot of sketching and a lot of color notes.
Yeah, we had hoped to get out to your studio, but seeing all your work is in town. But sometime we must go out. It'd be nice to contrast your drawings, your color notes, to see how you approach these.
Yes, I think people would enjoy that. I was fortunate this summer. I was a guest on a Canadian Freighter a large luxury freighter, if there's such a thing. And I was invited to go, and I painted all down the St. Lawrence and almost to Labrador with another artist friend, Mary Weiler, who lives in Caslow now. And from that, I have well over 200 sketches and color notes, and I hope to work up a show from that. I've just traveled across Canada on the train and then on the ship down the St. Lawrence. But I did do a lot of color notes there, and it's well worth it. In fact, I picked up one of those tiny paint boxes that I had thought, they're good paints, Winsor & Newton paints, and I had thought, oh, these are ridiculous, but it turned out to be very handy, because I had it with me all the time.
Right, never without your medium.
All we need now is dehydrated water or something, you know, to carry with us.
Well, let's go. Are you also the gardener, Phyllis, for the subject matter we have in a lot of these works?
Yes, for most of them. Some were contributed, but these are mostly from my own garden.
Right, it looks pretty vibrant. I guess having some relationship with what comes up has something to do with your reaction to them. In
I think so. I think you're more familiar with them, and I think most of my flower studies have a real feeling of growth.
Yeah, they suggest, rather than actually describe, they seem to suggest the growth of different kinds of flowers and plants, rather than be absolutely descriptive.
Yeah.
That's a nice quality.
This one was a bit experimental in that it's off-centered, you know,
Right.
But I did more textural effect in here to bring it down a little bit and bounce it off. And I think it's rather interesting instead of just a center vase full of flowers.
Both in the sky and in some of the flowers, there's some interesting, innovative kinds of texture. Are those little secrets that you've developed over the years?
They're professional techniques, but they're not secrets. Anybody who's taken
But
my
they look
workshops know.
effortless, you know, look like
Oh,
you didn't-
yeah. Well, some are spatter, some are water sprayed back in, some are salt thrown on, that effect.
Oh, yes.
Edible flowers we get.
So that might suggest some of the fun in experimenting some of your students might
Yeah.
have with you.
Uh-huh.
Let's move over to this next one, which covers a little more of the landscape again, the rolling hills. Whereabouts is this, Phil?
Actually, all right, sorry. This is up on Meadow Mountain, right up in the top in the alpine area, in the fall. So I'm actually on the top of the mountains. And this was done on the spot. Some burned wood there from old fires, fireweed in the foreground. This is a fairly accurate little study of fireweed, but the rest of it is sort of faded out. I don't do a detail all over a painting.
I know many of your teachers were into the Canadian landscape as a kind of Canadianism or Canadian mode of painting. Is it the idea or the concept of nationalism entered into your thoughts at all?
Not specifically, although I really do like being out, and this is such a gorgeous area. I try to always look at it with a fresh eye and not become used to it. We do live in a beautiful, beautiful part of the world, and I think to ever become dull about it is a shame.
I guess your biggest problem here is selectivity.
It
What
is.
to leave out.
Oh, yes, there's so much, you know, especially when you get on a mountaintop and you're seeing for miles and miles and miles. So you really do have to hone in on some small bit of it.
Have you ever considered your philosophy of paint as a painter or as of life, or which might encompass why do you do what you do?
That's a lot. I think I do what I do because I like doing it. And because if I don't paint for a week or two or a month, I'm really anxious to get back to it again. And it is more an expression than it is a duplication of a scene or something in front of me. And I'm anxious to get painting again.
You found your compulsion then.
Yes, yeah. But in terms of philosophy, aside from as I said, never being complacent about the area in which we live that's so gorgeous, always keeping that fresh and alive, observing, getting out into it and suffering with it sometimes, wind and mosquitoes and cold and so on. I don't go for isms, in painting that much, or schools of painting. I know I vary a little bit, and I think that any artist should, who isn't just going to become static, and be interested in what is happening and what is going on in the art world. But keep your own comments. And,
right. You do it in your work.
Yes, I think so. Right. I think so.
A lot of your works have quite a bit of color in them, and it seems to be the time of the year you did them. But this next one has a rather controlled, muted palette, very limited. I wonder if it has something to do with the time of the year?
Yes, a lot. It was late winter, and it was from a sketch, actually, and then I did the big painting actually in early summer, I believe, or late spring. But it was just weeds in my field. The snow started melting and a little bit of earth coming through here and there, and dead, dry weeds blowing in the wind.
It's very bold, yet it's simple, but it does show quite clearly your calligraphic form, your use of the brush with simplicity.
Yes, I think so. Yes.
I think this is one that Jack Shadbolt had remarked on.
Yes.
Made some interesting comments about
you. Yes, I was very, very
as a watercolorist.
Yeah, I was very pleased with that. He gave me a very good critique.
He was quite in sympathy with this, and I think it possibly reflects some of the qualities that he himself involves in his work.
Perhaps so. Yes,
there's a certain confidence in the medium.
Mm-hmm. That's one thing he did indicate in this, that there was a knowledge of the use of brush and watercolor and so on.
You've done a lot with less than in any of the others, I think. You've taken
and
such
I
a
think
small
often
amount.
those are the best ones.
Yeah, it's a very
when they are pared
work.
down to a certain extent.
This smaller work, Phyllis, seems a good one to ask you the question of what part imagination plays in your work.
Well, some certainly here. I was actually out in my studio and it was raining. And I thought, well, I can't go outside. And I looked through sketches and wasn't impressed at the moment with working any of those into a larger painting. And I looked out the window, which had rain running down it, through a little bit of mist. And here was a wild apple tree that was heavy with small apples. And the sun was sort of trying to come through, so there was a brilliance that was hitting it a little bit. But you can get the feeling of rain and dampness. And it has a somewhat fairy tale quality, and I think it's because of the fog and the rain.
Right.
And the fact that I was looking through raindrops when I painted it.
Yeah, the medium lends itself so well to atmospheric conditions.
Yes, yes. I think that's one reason I like it so much, watercolor as a medium.
The one next to it is also a fruit tree from your yard?
No, that again is over in the Ashcroft area, toward that area. And this was a tree yellow, golden yellow, with the leaves blowing. There was a tremendous storm coming up over a little lake in the background. You can see the dark clouds and the heavy wind. And the yellow of the tree just glowed against this heavy, dark sky. And the wind was blowing the leaves off, and you can see them flying across the painting. And it has a sort of Chinesey brushwork quality to it, but I think it has the feeling of both the brightness of the tree and the brilliance and the heaviness of the storm in the background.
Yeah, you seem to use your brush much like you possibly write. The free use of the calligraphic forms again.
Yes. Well, I think having done high-style fashion illustration at one time with a lot of brushwork probably has something to do with the way I handle the smaller brush now.
Do you have some opaque passages in there in terms
There's
of the
some,
leaves?
yes. In some, I used to be an absolute purist and not work with with white at all, because it does add, takes away from the clear, transparent quality of watercolor and adds that opaqueness. But in this situation, I think it worked out very well. And I did add white to my yellows here to bring it up against the cloud, rather than just leaving the light of the paper.
Yeah, it's difficult to be a purist and be spontaneous, isn't it? Because
Yes.
sometimes certain things are demanded.
Yes, because you also want to experiment. As I said earlier, I don't
Right.
want to become static, and you have to keep moving, I think, and working with different things.
Well, let's go to the other wall. You have some experimentations over there that are rather intriguing. This experiment comes close to being non-objectivity in action.
Right, right.
How do you feel about this one, Phyllis?
I feel it was an experiment, but I rather enjoyed working with it and approaching a subject matter that I'd done before in a little different manner.
Familiarity seemed to have loosened you up to try a lot of other
Yes,
things.
yes, yes. This actually was done from the same area and the same sketch as the Meadow Mountain one on the other side that we photographed before. And here I simply pared it down and simplified it and brought in patches of color and was more conscious, I think, of design.
You call this mountain fantasy. What is the place of titling in your work? Before the act or after the fact, or do you think it's immaterial?
After the fact, and I try to avoid numbers like prairie number 1, number 2, this sort of thing.
Right.
But sometimes it's difficult, and people have said that they enjoy my titling almost as much as the painting, I think. But it is interesting to try and come up with an innovative title that does describe the painting a little bit.
Could you ever see yourself going completely in this direction?
In certain situations, yes. Here again, I think more on the prairies, where it would be simplified and pared down. But not, I think, as a hard abstractionist. I'm not hard-edged. I still like the flow and the softness of watercolor.
This one has some of those qualities, but it's been related to conditions in nature. You know,
Yes.
so free.
To me, this has almost a Van Gogh quality and a little, some of the wildness. Now, this was from a little tiny sketch, just about so big. And I looked at it and caught the mood of the time and the place again. And there was a storm. I was out walking near my place again in a field, and going up this little rise of hill, and the storm clouds were coming up. And suddenly this patch of blue, the clouds parted, and there was that patch of blue in the middle. And that's what I call it, just patch of blue. That's the way it struck me and hit me. You can see the grass is blowing. The wind was, it was quite stormy and blustery.
You've really recaptured in the studio that same enthusiasm that you must have had in the environment there.
It's not always easy to do, but sometimes you can. I sit and I look at a sketch, and I'll go through the same sketchbook one day and not find anything that interesting, and a day later something hits me, and I'll pick up from where I had left off with the sketch.
You can recall the cold and mosquitoes
Yes,
or
very
sun or
much.
whatever is bothering you.
Very much, yes.
In this next one, is this a part of your yard, your garden?
Yes, this again is right outside my studio, and there's bracken, and people have said to me, well, why don't you cut that bracken? I cut enough to make cleared areas. But
Also that you can see in the area there.
Yes, yeah. But it has beautiful color in the fall. The bracken turns lovely colors, and I wouldn't want to clear it all out. Sometimes it's a nuisance.
You must wish for longer falls.
I do. This fall was beautiful, and it was excellent painting. And when we had the opening here of this show, several people came up to me and said, well, you must have gone through some emotional change. Your colors are so much brighter and so on. I said, no, it's not emotional change. It was just a beautiful, brilliant fall. And that's it. I do relate to what I'm painting.
Landscape is traditionally a horizontal mode of working, but in this next one, you've done a vertical,
Yes.
which I think fits the subject you chose.
Yes, I don't usually do verticals, but this did fit it. And this little house at the bottom of this cliff, this is at Headley, and the house has survived living at the bottom of that tremendous cliff for a lot of years, I think. But there's a threatening quality to it that I found kind of interesting, this towering rock above this house. But on the other hand, there's a sort of coziness as the house nestles in against it.
It's a kind of situation, I guess not too many people in the prairies recognize this huge mountain area, which really is made most effective by a vertical like that. And we have these kind of situations so much in our landscape. Little houses sitting at the foot of an ominous mountain, which at any time may just decide to cave in on.
Right, but it doesn't seem to have. It's still there. I mentioned this was at Headley, didn't I?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, I note in the rock forms, there's always a variety of kinds of texture that are different, and they're sometimes hard to deal with. You seem to have found ways of suggesting different kinds of rock surface there that streak and run, or some are very granular.
Yes, yeah. I think it has a sort of Chinese quality too, somehow. I didn't do that purposely, but as I looked at it later, some of the handling of the mountain and the trees had a little of that brush quality.
Was there much to leave out here
Yes, quite a bit.
to make it effective?
To make it effective. Although that rock itself was fairly simple, but as I recall, there was more detail down at the bottom, and I just pared it down.
Well, the simplicity of the houses is rather intriguing. You've caught just enough of them to give a comfortable contrast. I would imagine over-involvement with the kinds of texture on the roof and the sides of the house, would really make it a little complicated for this huge area you're
It would have
dealing
been
with
too much texture, I think. Then the house stands out as being, it almost looks like a paper cutout at the bottom in a sense, doesn't it, when I look at it? But that's one of the things that I find difficult to persuade students, is to eliminate a good deal and just get a feeling of log or board or texture. No, don't put everyone in all over.
You must have become aware, I guess, moving to this area and having painted on the prairies, that here we see very little sky from our normal stance.
Right.
And the mountains tower up like walls around us. As happens here. But in this next one, it approximates a little closer what might happen on the prairie.
Well, this looks more like prairie, but again, it's out toward a Soyuz, where you're up top.
Oh, right.
And looking over the hills a bit, and again it was fall, and there was some cloud coming, and again the bright bit of blue in the sky, autumn colors and rolling hills. Here again with some of these bleed, just water splashed on that some people might think was a mistake, but actually I think it adds an interesting bit of texture. Some of fine detail has a feeling of the edge of a field of something growing.
In other modes of working in say, acrylic or oil, you can keep working on a work until you're satisfied with it. But in watercolor, it tends to be all at once or into the garbage. How do you make out with this problem of...
Into the garbage sometimes. Work very, very spontaneously, very quickly. And then I can put it aside and bring it back and bring a little more detail in. But if you overwork a watercolor, you've probably ruined it. And I often say, and I feel that stopping 10 minutes before you think you should is better than working a half hour longer. And because it should keep that spontaneity, I think.
This next one looks like we've captured a section of the bush, the brush. There's a lot of rich greens happening there.
Yes. Again, this is just outside my studio. Changed around a little bit. We can do that with landscape, where a camera can't. But again, the feeling of wet and rain and the sunshine breaking through.
Okay, one last question, Phyllis. Our time, I guess, is running out. What's your future? Where are you going from here?
Well, I'm not quite sure. I've been asked to be one of quite a few artists, I'm sure, who've been asked to participate in a program out of Kelowna, and Kamloops rather, and Kamloops College, Caribou College, and of a study of Western landscape artists. And that is being picked up by educational television in Toronto and will be on CBC. So that, if that all happens, it will be very good. It will take a long time, I think, several months for that to evolve. And some nice things have been happening lately. The Jack Shadbolt critique was very good. And I've had things at the National Gallery, and I've shown all over this province, and I show all the time in Alberta. And I've been at Banff at the Peter White Gallery, which is a lovely spot.
Yeah, it is a nice spot. Well, thanks very much, Phyllis. It's really been great
you're welcome,
looking at
Ernie.
your work here. We've been watching and talking with Phyllis Margolin and her current exhibition in that gallery on Baker Street, Nelson. Thank you very much.
Thank you.